Have you ever been sitting at your own table in your own house, smiling politely, and suddenly realize someone else has already decided how your home will be used? I didn't think it would happen to me either. Ha ha ha, I almost laugh now thinking about how calm she sounded, but that evening it wasn't funny at all. The candles were lit, the pie was still warm, and the lake outside my windows looked like a sheet of glass. It was peaceful. Too peaceful. That's when she looked around my dining room and said in that sweet voice of hers, "What a lovely house." I smiled. Of course she thought it was lovely. I had worked for decades to make sure it was. Then she added, still smiling, "My parents can take the upstairs. My sister and her kids can have the downstairs. It's your duty to host us. You've got the space." Just like that, no pause, no hesitation. As if she were asking for another slice of pie. I waited for someone to laugh. No one did. I turned to my son. He nodded, not loudly, not proudly, just a small nod. And that nod hurt more than her words. Have you ever seen someone you raised agree to something that slowly erases you? Sigh, that's what it felt like. My fork touched the plate and made the smallest sound, but in that room it felt like thunder. I stood up. I didn't rush. I didn't slam anything. I stood up, smiled, and said calmly, "This is my home, not yours." That was it. That was the sentence. The room went silent. You could almost hear the air change. Her smile twitched. My son blinked like he hadn't expected resistance. The children at the table looked confused. She cleared her throat and said, "We're family." Off family. Such a powerful word, isn't it? It can warm you or trap you depending on who is holding it. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I simply repeated, softer this time, "This is my home." I wish I could say I felt brave in that moment. Truth is, my hands were trembling under the table. I had spent most of my life avoiding conflict. I raised my son alone after my husband passed. I packed lunches. I worked long hours. I skipped vacations. I said yes when I could and no only when I had to. I gave him the deposit for his first apartment. I paid for part of their wedding when no one else stepped forward, not because I was asked, because I wanted to. I never kept score. Mothers aren't supposed to keep score, right? But sitting there, watching my daughter-in-law assign bedrooms in my house like she was arranging furniture in a store, something inside me tightened. It wasn't about space. It wasn't even about her parents. It was about being treated like a resource instead of a person. She leaned back and laughed lightly. "We'll only stay a few weeks. The kids deserve a lake summer." Ah, the kids. It always circles back to the kids, as if saying no to adults somehow becomes cruelty to children. I looked at my son again. I waited for him to speak. I waited for him to say, "Mom, we should have talked to you first." He didn't. He just avoided my eyes, that silence that was louder than anything she said. Have you ever realized that sometimes betrayal isn't loud? It's quiet. It's someone choosing comfort over you. I cleared the plates while they continued discussing which rooms would have the best sunlight. I heard her mother ask about closet space. I heard her sister mention bringing storage bins in my house. Ha ha ha, the nerve almost impressed me. When they finally left that evening, I stood at the door and watched their car disappear down the gravel road. The lake looked the same. The house looked the same, but something had shifted. I walked through each room slowly. Upstairs, downstairs, my bedroom, the guest room, the hallway where I had imagined peaceful mornings with tea and silence. I had bought this house with money saved over years of careful living. I didn't buy it for parties. I didn't buy it to host extended families. I bought it for quiet, for space, for the sound of my own thoughts, and now someone had tried to rearrange it with a smile. Do you know what that does to a person? It makes you question whether your kindness was mistaken for weakness. That night I didn't sleep well. Every small noise made me sit up, not out of fear but alertness, like my walls needed guarding. I kept replaying the moment in my head, her voice, his nod, my sentence. "This is my home, not yours." It was simple, but it felt like the beginning of something bigger. I didn't know yet how far she was willing to go. I didn't know what would show up in my driveway just days later. And if you've ever had someone try to take what you worked your whole life for with a polite smile, then you already understand why I stood up that night. But what happened next, well, that's when I realized standing up once was only the beginning. And trust me, I wasn't prepared for the sound of a moving truck outside my window just 7 days later. Do you know what hurts more than someone trying to take your space? Realizing you trained yourself to give it away. That's the part no one talks about. People saw a calm woman standing up at a dinner table. What they didn't see was the 40 years before that moment. 40 years of saying, "It's fine," when it wasn't fine, of adjusting, of shrinking a little to make room for others. I wasn't always strong like that sentence sounded. I became strong because I had to. When my husband died, my son was 12, still leaving lights on in rooms he forgot to turn off, still asking if ghosts were real. I didn't have time to collapse into grief. I made schedules instead. I packed lunches at 6 a.m. I ironed school shirts. I learned how to fix small things around the apartment because there was no one else to call. At night after he slept, I would sit at the kitchen table and stare at the bills, calculating, recalculating, whispering little prayers into the quiet. Hahaha, I used to joke with myself that math became my second language. Not because I loved numbers, but because numbers kept the lights on. I worked in a university archive for decades, basement level, dusty boxes, old letters tied with ribbon, other people's memories neatly labeled and preserved. I handled fragile paper with gentle hands. I respected the past. I kept things in order. Funny, isn't it? I could organize entire histories for strangers, but I never organized my own boundaries. When my son wanted something and I could afford it, I said yes. When he couldn't afford something, I figured out how to make it happen. First apartment deposit, I paid it. Wedding dress when her family hesitated, I wrote the check. No drama, no speech, just quiet support. They thanked me, of course, always polite, always warm, but gratitude, I've learned, isn't the same as respect. Have you ever noticed that? Someone can appreciate what you give and still assume you'll give more. I never asked for much in return. I didn't want holidays planned around me. I didn't want praise. I wanted one thing: peace, just peace. A place where no one needed anything from me. That was my dream, not a cruise, not luxury, just stillness. So every month I put a little aside. Sometimes it was only $20, sometimes $50. I skipped trips. I wore coats longer than I should have. I told myself one day I would have a house by the water. One day I would wake up and hear nothing but wind and birds. One day I wouldn't be needed for money or babysitting or advice unless I chose to be. When I finally found this house, I drove there alone. I remember the first time I turned the key in the door. My hands were shaking then too, but from excitement. The sunlight came straight through the kitchen window and landed on the sink like it belonged there. The lake shimmered behind the trees. I stood in the empty living room and whispered, "Mine." Not loud, just enough for me to hear it. I paid in full, no mortgage, no help, mine. For one whole year, it was exactly what I hoped. I drank tea on the porch. I read books without checking my phone every 5 minutes. I slept through the night. I didn't rush. I didn't explain myself. It felt earned. That's why her words at the dinner table didn't just surprise me, they unsettled me. "It's your duty to host us." Duty. As if motherhood had no expiration date, as if sacrifice was permanent, as if retirement from giving wasn't allowed. All I used to think love meant endless access. Now I know love also needs limits, but here's the part that kept circling in my mind after that dinner. My son's nod, not her boldness, his nod. When did he start seeing my house as extra space instead of my sanctuary? When did my dream become spare bedrooms? I kept replaying memories, him at 12, him at 18, him hugging me before college. I remembered thinking, as long as he's happy, I'm happy. That was true then. But somewhere along the way, I forgot to ask if I was allowed to be happy too. Have you ever built your life around someone else so completely that when you finally step back, they don't recognize the boundary? That's what this felt like. Not sudden cruelty, just slow assumption. And assumptions are dangerous because they grow quietly. The week after that dinner, I tried to tell myself it was just talk. Maybe she was dreaming out loud. Maybe she didn't mean it seriously. Maybe my son would call and clarify. He didn't. Days passed. Silence. No apology. No "Mom, we should talk." Just normal messages about weather and work, as if assigning my rooms had been a casual suggestion. That silence started to feel heavy. I walked through my house again and again that week. Upstairs, downstairs, guest room, hallway. I touched the walls like I needed reassurance they were still mine. Ha ha ha, I even laughed at myself once. "You're being dramatic," I said out loud, but deep down something didn't feel finished. Something felt planned. And if you think I'm exaggerating, ask yourself this: who talks about bedroom assignments without already imagining the move? I should have trusted that instinct sooner, because 7 days after that dinner, while I was rinsing a coffee cup at the sink, I heard the sound that changed everything. Gravel crunching, slow, heavy, confident. I looked out the window and saw a large white truck turning into my driveway. Not a small car, not a visit, a moving truck. And that's when I realized that dinner conversation wasn't a suggestion, it was an announcement. And what she brought with her that day, well, that's when standing up once stopped being enough. Have you ever had a moment where your stomach drops before your mind understands why? That's what it felt like when I saw that white truck crawling up my driveway. It wasn't speeding, it wasn't confused. It moved slowly, confidently, like it had been here before. My hands were still wet from washing a cup. I didn't even dry them. I just stood there at the sink, staring through the kitchen window as the tires crushed the gravel I had carefully laid myself last spring. "No," I whispered, ha, not in panic, more like disbelief. Surely this was a mistake. A delivery truck, wrong address, but then the driver's door opened, and she stepped out, sunglasses, neat hair, clipboard in hand. Clipboard, not a suitcase. Not a weekend bag, a clipboard. Behind her came her parents, then her sister. Then the 2 children I had met only once at a birthday party. My heart didn't race, that surprised me. It didn't pound or tremble, it just steadied. Like my body knew before my thoughts caught up. Boxes began appearing from the back of the truck. Plastic bins, suitcases, a folded crib, lawn chairs, they weren't visiting. They were settling. I didn't move at first. I just watched them organize themselves across my front yard like they were claiming sections of a picnic ground. She pointed toward the upstairs windows while speaking to one of the movers. I couldn't hear her words, but I didn't need to. I knew. I knew. One of the children ran ahead and slapped both palms against my front door. Bang, bang, not knocking, just testing. The sound echoed through the hallway. That's when my body moved. I walked calmly to the door and turned the deadbolt, then the second lock. My fingers were steady. I remember noticing that, steady. "Mom," she called brightly from outside. "We're here," as if she had been invited. The handle turned, it rattled once, twice. "Open the door," her voice sang out again, still sweet, still controlled. I didn't answer. Have you ever stayed silent not because you were afraid, but because you refused to participate? The banging got louder, the sweetness dropped. "This isn't funny," she snapped. "The kids are tired." Ah, the kids again. Always the children positioned like shields. I stepped away from the door and picked up my phone from the small table by the wall. My hand still did not shake. I dialed the sheriff's office. My voice when I spoke sounded almost distant to my own ears. Calm, measured. "There are people attempting to enter my home without permission," I said. "Yes, I am inside. Yes, I am alone." Outside, her father's voice rose in irritation. I heard him say something about family rights. The word rights almost made me laugh. Ha ha ha, rights to what exactly? To my mortgage-free house, to my quiet. The truck engine idled, more boxes thudded against the ground. Someone tried the handle again, harder this time. The children began to cry, not loudly at first, just confused whimpers. And for a split second, I felt that old instinct rise inside me, the instinct to open the door just to stop the crying, to smooth things over, to avoid a scene. That instinct has ruled most of my life. But this time I didn't obey it. I sat down in the chair near the window and folded my hands in my lap. I listened to the noise without letting it inside me. That was new, very new. Minutes later, I saw the patrol car turn onto the road. The sound of it seemed to slice the air cleanly. The banging stopped almost immediately. Voices shifted from aggressive to defensive. When the deputies stepped out, the entire tone outside changed. I heard her explaining rapidly, laughing lightly, saying there must be a misunderstanding. I heard her father arguing. I heard one deputy say clearly, "You do not have permission to enter." That sentence felt like armor. I didn't open the door until one of the deputies knocked properly and identified himself. Properly. When I stepped onto the porch, the scene looked smaller somehow, less confident. The clipboard was gone, the sunglasses were off, her smile had vanished completely. My son was not there. That detail hit me later, not in the moment. In the moment, I just nodded and confirmed calmly, they were not invited. She stared at me like I had betrayed her. The irony almost made me sigh out loud. After a tense exchange, the boxes were lifted back into the truck. The children were ushered inside vehicles. The engine roared again. Gravel shifted as they backed out. She didn't look at me when she left. I watched until the road was empty again, then I locked the door once more, even though it was already locked. The house felt different after that, not broken, but aware, like it understood it had been tested. I walked through each room slowly. Upstairs, downstairs, I touched the stair railing. I stood in the guest room doorway. I inhaled deeply. It still smelled like fresh paint and lake air, mine, all of it, but the quiet no longer felt naive. It felt earned through resistance. That evening I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, listening to the water lap against the dock. The sunset looked exactly the same as it had the week before. That's the strange thing about life. The sky doesn't change just because people do. I thought maybe that was the end of it. Maybe the embarrassment of police involvement would settle things. Maybe boundaries had finally been understood. Ha ha ha, I should have known better. Because what happened 2 days later didn't come with a moving truck. It came through a screen, and it spread faster than gravel under tires. And trust me, public humiliation hits differently than a knock on your door. Have you ever opened your laptop expecting nothing and found your name quietly burning in a room full of strangers? That's how it started. I hadn't heard from my son, not a call, not a message. After the truck incident, the silence felt thick, but I told myself maybe everyone needed time to cool down. Maybe embarrassment had done its job. Maybe people were reflecting. Ha ha ha, I was wrong. 2 days later, I opened my computer to check the weather and saw her name tagged in a post that already had dozens of comments. My heart didn't race. It didn't have to. I knew. I clicked. "My mother-in-law locked our children out of her house," she wrote. "They were crying on the porch. She called the police on her own family. We came in peace and she treated us like criminals." A bitter, lonely woman with too many rules and no heart. I stared at the words, not shocked, not even angry at first, just still. Have you ever felt something settle instead of sting? That's what it did. The post included a photo. One of the children sitting on a plastic bin near the edge of my lawn. The image was cropped tight. You couldn't see the moving truck. You couldn't see the stack of bins behind them. You couldn't hear the banging on my door. Just a sad child in a house in the background. Clever, very clever. The comments came in fast. "That's awful. How can someone be so cold? Some people shouldn't be near kids. Sympathy poured in like rain. And there it was again, that word family used like a weapon. I read every comment, slowly, carefully. I wasn't looking for defense. I was studying tone. It's strange how quickly a story becomes truth when only one side speaks. I could have responded, I could have typed out every detail. The clipboard, the forced entry, the deputy's words, but something stopped me. Have you ever realized that explaining yourself to people who already decided you're wrong rarely brings peace? Sigh, I closed my mouth, then I saw something unexpected, a familiar name in the comments. Marlene, she works at the post office in town, quiet woman, always folds envelopes like they're precious. She wrote, I was there. They did not knock, they tried to enter without permission. That was not a visit, that was an invasion. No drama, no emotion, just fact. Her comment didn't get many likes, it didn't go viral, but it stayed there, solid, unmoved. I bookmarked it, then I shut the laptop gently and pushed it aside. The house was quiet around me, too quiet. That night I didn't sleep in my bedroom. I went to the back room that faces the lake. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the water through the window. The moon reflected softly. The world outside didn't care about social media posts. It didn't argue, it didn't defend, it simply existed. And that's when something inside me shifted. The embarrassment I expected to feel didn't come. Instead, there was clarity. She wasn't trying to move into my house anymore. She was trying to move into my reputation. That's different. One threatens walls, the other threatens identity. Have you ever had someone paint you as the villain so they don't have to admit their own entitlement? It's a strange feeling. You want to defend yourself. You want to shout, that's not true, but I didn't because truth doesn't always need noise. The next morning I made coffee and walked through the house slowly. Upstairs, downstairs, guest room. I stopped in the unused room at the end of the hall, boxes still stacked, old coats hanging, 2 broken lamps I never threw away. I stood there longer than necessary. Why was this room empty? Why had I left space unused for so long? The answer surprised me because I was saving it for family, saving it for visits that never really came, saving it for people who now believed they were entitled to it. Ha ha ha, I actually laughed out loud, not bitter. Just aware, maybe the problem wasn't that I said no. Maybe the problem was that I had always left room open without defining its purpose. That afternoon, I wrote a small list on the back of an envelope. Paint, clean. Replace mattress, new sheets, clear closet. I taped it to the fridge. I didn't fully know what I was planning yet. I just knew I wasn't going to sit and watch my character be rewritten. If they wanted to call me cold, fine. I would be calm. If they wanted to call me lonely, fine. I would be peaceful. There's a difference, a big one. And while the internet buzzed with opinions about me, I picked up a paintbrush. Quietly, intentionally. Because if someone tries to shrink your world publicly, sometimes the most powerful response is to expand it privately. And what I did with that guest room over the next 10 days, well, that changed everything. But before I tell you how peace started paying rent in my own home, let me ask you something. Have you ever had to stand alone in your own space while the world misunderstood you? If you have, you're not alone here. This channel shares the stories people whisper about but rarely say out loud. If that speaks to you, subscribe and stay, because what I built next wasn't revenge, it was something much stronger, and my son had no idea it was coming. Do you know what healing sounds like? It doesn't shout, it doesn't argue online, it sounds like sandpaper moving slowly across old wood. SHHH, SHHH, steady, patient. That's what filled my house the morning after I taped that list to the fridge. I walked into the unused guest room, rolled up my sleeves, and opened the windows wide. Fresh air rushed in like it had been waiting. The room smelled like storage and hesitation, boxes stacked in corners, old winter coats I hadn't worn in years, 2 broken lamps collecting dust. I stood in the middle of it and whispered, no more waiting. Ha ha ha, it felt dramatic, but it was true. For 10 days I worked quietly. I stripped the old wallpaper near the window. I sanded the frame until the wood felt smooth under my fingers. I painted the walls a soft, clean color that reflected morning light gently, not bright. Not loud, just calm. Each brush stroke felt like reclaiming something. Have you ever noticed how physical work clears emotional noise? My mind stopped replaying her post. It stopped replaying the banging on my door. Instead, it focused on simple tasks. Paint, rinse, dry, fold. I cleared the closet completely. I washed fresh sheets and hung them outside on the line. The smell of sun-dried cotton drifting through the hallway made me sigh in a way I hadn't in weeks. I ordered a new mattress, firm, affordable, delivered quietly on a Tuesday morning. When the delivery men left, I made the bed carefully, smoothing every corner like it mattered, because it did. By the time I hung simple curtains and placed a folded towel at the foot of the bed, the room had changed. It no longer felt like storage, it felt intentional. That's when the idea fully formed. If they saw this house as extra space, I would define its purpose myself. I opened my laptop again, not to defend myself, not to argue. I opened a rental listing site and created an account. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment, then I typed slowly, quiet lakeside home, 1 guest room, maximum 2 adults, no children, no pets, no parties, no extended stays, this is a space for rest. If you're not seeking rest, please do not book. I read it twice. Simple, clear, no apology. I didn't make it flashy. I didn't offer discounts. I didn't open the calendar wide, just a few select dates each month. Control. That word felt new in my hands. The first booking request came 3 days later. A ceramic artist traveling from another state. She asked politely about morning light and whether she could bring her own kettle. Bring her own kettle. I smiled at that. I accepted. When she arrived, she carried a small suitcase and thanked me for the quiet. She stayed 2 nights. She read on the porch. She left a handwritten note on a postcard and a tiny blue teacup with a chip in the rim. Thank you for sharing your piece, the note said. I placed the teacup on the kitchen windowsill. It caught the sunlight beautifully. No drama, no entitlement, just respect. The second guest was a retired professor, soft-spoken. He wore slippers indoors and took out his own trash without being asked. On his last morning, he left a wrapped chocolate bar on the counter with a note that read, "Peace lives here. Peace lives here." I stood in the hallway after he left and let those words sink in. Not family obligation lives here, not duty, peace. For the first time since that dinner table, I felt something stronger than defensiveness. I felt proud. Not because I was making money. The small rental income didn't matter much. What mattered was that I had defined my space on my terms. Have you ever realized that boundaries don't push people away, they reveal who respects you? As the weeks passed, the house regained its rhythm. The floorboards creaked gently at night, the lake shimmered in the mornings. I spaced bookings carefully. No one stayed longer than 3 nights. No one tried to rearrange anything. The guest room stayed neat, welcoming, but never claimed. Then one afternoon, while I was watering the small plants by the porch, I saw a familiar car at the end of my driveway. My son's car. It didn't pull in right away. It sat there for a few minutes, engine running. My heart tightened, not in fear but in curiosity. He stepped out slowly. Alone, no clipboard, no truck, no audience, just him. He walked toward the house like someone approaching a door he wasn't sure would open. I was already standing at the screen door when he reached the steps. "Hi, Mom," he said softly, as if nothing had changed, as if everything had. I opened the door and stepped aside without speaking. He walked in and glanced around the living room. I noticed his eyes pause briefly on the hallway leading to the guest room. "You've been busy," he said. I nodded. "I have." We sat down. He didn't touch the chair she had used during that dinner. Instead, he sat on the edge of the sofa, elbows on his knees. "Things got out of hand," he began. I waited. She meant well. There it was again, meant well. I inhaled slowly. "For who?" I asked quietly. He looked at the floor. Silence stretched between us. And in that silence, I realized something important. This conversation wasn't about the house anymore. It was about choice. And his silence at that dinner table had been a choice. But what he said next, that's when I understood whether anything had truly changed. Have you ever sat across from someone you love and realized you are finally seeing them clearly for the first time? Not the child you raised, not the memories you protected, but the adult sitting in front of you making decisions. That's what it felt like as my son leaned forward on my sofa, elbows on his knees, staring at the rug like it might answer for him. "She meant well," he repeated softly. "Meant well." Ha ha ha, that phrase has caused more damage than honest cruelty ever could. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't sigh dramatically. I just looked at him and asked, "For who?" The question hung in the air between us. He rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit he had as a teenager. "For her parents," he said. "They've been having a hard time. We thought you had space. We thought, not you asked, not you discussed, we thought." I felt something steady inside me, not anger, not sadness, just clarity. "You thought my house was extra," I said calmly. He opened his mouth as if to argue, then closed it again. Silence can be very loud when someone is searching for excuses. "I didn't think you'd call the police," he finally added. There it was, not "I'm sorry," not "we were wrong," just surprise at my resistance. Have you ever noticed how some people are more shocked by your boundary than by their behavior? I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands loosely in my lap. "I didn't think I would need to," I answered. My voice didn't tremble. That surprised him. He looked up at me then, really looked like he was measuring whether I was serious. "You embarrassed her," he said quietly. Ah, so that was the wound, not the invasion, not the assumption, the embarrassment. I felt a small, tired laugh rise in my chest. "She brought a moving truck," I replied. "What did you think would happen?" He didn't answer right away. His shoulders dropped slightly, like the weight of something finally settling. "I didn't want to make things worse," he said after a moment. That sentence hit differently. I leaned forward just enough so he had to see my face clearly. "You didn't want to make them worse for her," I said gently. "But you made them worse for me." He blinked. He hadn't thought of it that way. I could see it. For a second he looked like that 12-year-old boy again, unsure, caught between comfort and courage. But this wasn't homework, this was character. Why didn't you speak? I asked him quietly. No accusation, just a question. He stared at his hands. I don't know, he whispered, and for the first time that afternoon I believed him. I don't know, sometimes silence isn't strategy. It's fear of conflict, fear of upsetting a spouse, fear of choosing sides, but here's the hard truth, not choosing is still choosing. When you nodded, I continued softly, you made a decision. You decided I would adjust. His jaw tightened slightly. That's not fair, he murmured. I tilted my head. Was it fair to assign rooms in a house you didn't buy? He didn't respond. The house felt quiet around us, not tense, just aware. The lake outside shimmered gently, completely unaffected by our conversation. I've spent my life giving, I said after a pause. I never kept score, I never asked for repayment, but I did expect respect. That word seemed to land. Respect, it's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's basic. He ran his hands through his hair and sighed. She feels like you don't like her, he said carefully. I almost smiled. This isn't about liking, I replied. It's about limits. Have you ever tried to explain to someone that love without boundaries turns into access, unlimited access, and unlimited access eventually becomes assumption? He looked around the living room again, his eyes briefly pausing toward the hallway. You're renting out the room now? He asked. His tone wasn't accusing, just surprised. Yes, I said simply. To strangers, I nodded. To respectful strangers. The words weren't sharp, but they were clear. He exhaled slowly like he was trying to absorb the shift. This house, I always thought, he stopped himself. I waited. I always thought one day it would be ours. There it was, not malicious, just assumed inheritance. I didn't react immediately. I let that sentence breathe. Did you? I asked quietly. Did you ever ask what I thought? Silence again. This time heavier. He looked older in that moment, not tired, just confronted. I guess I just figured, he began. Exactly, I said gently. You figured. We sat like that for several minutes, no shouting, no tears. Just reality settling into the room. Finally, he stood up. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted, and that might have been the most honest thing he said all afternoon. I didn't offer him a solution. I didn't reassure him. I simply said, that depends on what you're willing to protect. He nodded slowly, not confidently, not defiantly, just slowly. When he walked to the door, he hesitated for a brief second, like he might hug me. He didn't. He stepped outside, walked down the porch steps, and got into his car. I watched him drive away without waving, not because I was angry, because this wasn't a goodbye scene, it was a crossroads. Some silences ask for patience. Others ask to be left alone. And 3 days after that conversation, when a new booking request arrived from a woman traveling alone for the first time since losing her husband, I realized something important. My house wasn't losing family, it was gaining clarity, and what that woman said to me on my back porch at sunrise, that changed the way I saw everything. Have you ever met a stranger who understood you without asking too many questions? 3 days after my son drove away, I received a booking request from a woman named Helen. Her message was short, careful. She wrote that she was 66, recently widowed, and this would be her first trip alone since her husband passed. I'm not looking for adventure, she said, just somewhere quiet where I don't have to explain myself. I read that sentence twice. Somewhere quiet where I don't have to explain myself. Oh, I felt that. I accepted her request immediately. When she arrived, she carried one medium suitcase and a canvas tote bag filled with books. No rush, no drama. She stepped out of her car slowly and looked at the lake before she even looked at me. That told me everything. It's beautiful, she said softly, not excited, not loud, just grateful. I showed her the guest room, fresh sheets. Folded towel, a small vase with simple flowers from my yard. She ran her hand lightly across the dresser like she was confirming it was real. Thank you for keeping it simple, she said. Simple, I smiled. Simple is peaceful, I answered. That evening she kept to herself. I heard the faint sound of pages turning from the hallway. No phone calls, no music blasting, just quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty. The next morning I woke early and walked onto the back porch with my tea. She was already there, wrapped in a light sweater, watching the sunrise over the water. Steam curled from the mug in her hands. I hope you don't mind, she said gently. I found the chamomile. Ha ha ha, imagine that, asking permission for tea. Of course not, I replied. I poured my own cup and sat beside her. We didn't speak at first. We just watched the light slowly stretch across the lake. After a while she sighed, not a sad sigh, a deep one. This house has a kindness to it, she said. That sentence rested between us like something fragile. I didn't rush to respond. I just let it settle, a kindness. No one had described my house that way before. I'm glad it feels that way, I finally answered. She nodded. After my husband died, everyone kept telling me to stay busy, she continued. But sometimes busy is just noise. I glanced at her, recognizing the weight in her voice. Have you ever noticed how grief and clarity often arrive together? Sometimes quiet is what heals, I said softly. She looked at me carefully then, like she sensed there was more behind my words. You built this place for quiet, didn't you? She asked. I smiled faintly. Yes, she didn't press further, she didn't ask about family. She didn't ask why the listing said no children, she simply understood boundaries without questioning them. That alone felt like respect. Later that afternoon, she told me her husband had always wanted to visit this part of the country but never made the time. We thought we had forever, she whispered. There it was again, assumption, but not entitlement this time, just human delay. I came alone, she said, because I realized forever isn't guaranteed. I nodded. We sat quietly for a long time after that. No dramatic tears, just shared understanding. That night, as I washed dishes, I realized something surprising. I didn't feel defensive anymore. I didn't feel misunderstood. I felt aligned. This house wasn't selfish. It wasn't cold. It was intentional. The next morning, before she left, I found her carefully folding the blanket at the end of the bed. She left a single sunflower in a small glass jar on the nightstand. No note. Just the flower. When she handed me the key, she looked at me warmly. Thank you, she said, for not over-explaining. I almost laughed at that. Ha ha ha, not over-explaining. That used to be my habit. Explaining myself until everyone felt comfortable. But now I simply nodded and said, "You're welcome." After she drove away, I walked down to the dock and sat with my legs tucked beneath me. The boards felt warm from the sun. I thought about my son, about that dinner table, about the moving truck, and then I thought about this woman who arrived with one suitcase and left a sunflower behind. One tried to enter with assumption, the other entered with respect. Same house. Different energy. Have you ever realized the problem was never your boundary, it was who refused to honor it? That afternoon, I opened my listing online again. I read it slowly. Quiet lakeside home, space for rest. I added one more line at the bottom. Please enter with respect. I didn't write it for strangers, I wrote it for myself, because clarity doesn't always come in loud moments. Sometimes it arrives in soft conversations on porches at sunrise, and just when I felt settled, just when peace felt steady, another message appeared, but this one wasn't from a guest. It was from someone who still believed my house belonged to their future, and what she wrote next proved that entitlement rarely leaves quietly. Have you ever noticed how some people don't let go, they just change tactics? Just when the house began to feel steady again, just when the sunflower on the nightstand had dried at the edges and the lake looked calm enough to mirror the sky perfectly, my phone buzzed late one evening. A neighbor had forwarded me something with a short message. "I thought you should see this." I already knew. I didn't feel panic. I felt recognition. I opened the link slowly. There she was again, another post, this time less sweet, less polished. "She's renting out the house to strangers now," she wrote, "taking money from people she's never met. Meanwhile, the family she should be helping gets treated like outsiders. This is the house my husband is supposed to inherit one day." I read that last sentence twice. Supposed to inherit, not hope to, not discussed, supposed to. Ha ha ha, the confidence almost amazed me. Have you ever seen someone claim tomorrow before tomorrow even arrives? The comments rolled in again. Some people agreed with her, some stayed quiet, but something was different this time. The sympathy wasn't as loud. Maybe the first wave had passed, maybe people sensed the tone shift, or maybe truth simply has a way of surfacing slowly. I didn't comment, I didn't defend myself, I didn't call my son. I closed the app and set my phone face down on the table. I walked outside instead. The evening air felt cool against my skin. The lake was dark but steady. I stood on the porch and breathed in deeply. Have you ever realized that arguing online never restores peace in real life? What would I even say? That I paid for the house myself, that there was no agreement, that inheritance is not an automatic right. It felt unnecessary. Because here's the truth, entitlement weakens when it's not fed. The next morning, curiosity nudged me just enough to look again. Under her post, I saw a familiar name, Marlene, calm as ever. She wrote, "It is her house, she bought it. She maintains it, and maybe she is choosing peace over guilt, that is her right." No insults, no drama, just fact. There were fewer comments this time, no large wave of outrage, just quiet. By afternoon, the post was gone. Completely deleted, her account disappeared soon after, not deactivated temporarily. Gone. I stared at the blank page for a moment, not satisfied, not triumphant, just aware. Have you ever watched someone retreat when their story stops working? That's what it felt like. There was no apology, no correction, no phone call from my son explaining anything, just silence. But this silence felt different from the one at the dinner table. That silence had been avoidance. This one felt like distance. And distance can be peaceful. Days passed, no truck, no posts, no confrontation. I mailed my son a simple birthday card that week. No message inside, just my name signed the way I've always written it. Same handwriting from his school permission slips. Same ink. I didn't write a lecture, I didn't write a demand. Because love doesn't need speeches, it needs awareness. Whether he would find that awareness or not, that was no longer mine to control. Meanwhile, the bookings continued quietly. A couple in their early 40s requested a short stay. They weren't coming for vacation, they were coming to elope. No ceremony, no guests, just vows by the lake at sunrise. I accepted. When they arrived, they carried fresh lilacs wrapped in brown paper. The scent filled the kitchen gently. They thanked me for holding space, as they called it, holding space. I liked that phrase. On their last morning, they left a small note on the table. Thank you for giving us clarity, peace, respect, words that felt steady. Not dramatic, steady. After they left, I stood in the quiet kitchen and looked around. The house felt whole, not empty, whole. I thought back to her sentence, "It's your duty to host us." Duty, that word had once made me hesitate. Now it sounded foreign. My duty is not to absorb everyone's plans. My duty is not to provide unlimited access. My duty is to protect what I built. Have you ever realized that protecting your peace doesn't make you selfish, it makes you responsible? That evening, as the sun lowered behind the trees, I walked to the shed and pulled out a small wooden plank. I sanded it down slowly. My hands moved with care, not rushed, not angry, intentional. I painted it a soft gray, the same shade as the lake on cloudy mornings. I didn't write anything on it yet. I just let the paint dry overnight, because sometimes clarity needs a symbol. And the next morning, when I picked up a brush to add a simple message beside my front door, I knew it wasn't for her. It wasn't even for my son, it was for me. And what those few words said changed the feeling of that house forever. Have you ever done something small and felt it echo through your whole life? That's what it felt like the next morning when I carried that painted wooden plank out to the porch. The air was cool, early September cool, the kind that reminds you summer doesn't last forever. I placed the board on the step beside me and sat down with a thin brush and a steady hand. I didn't rush the letters. I never rush words anymore. Words matter, they linger, they define. Slowly, carefully, I painted 4 simple words, private, by invitation only. I stared at them for a long moment before attaching the sign beside the front door, not as a warning, not as a threat. Just as truth, have you ever realized that sometimes you need to see your boundary written down to fully believe it yourself? I stepped back and wiped the light dust from my hands. The sign looked natural there, like it had always belonged. The lake shimmered behind me, quiet and indifferent to human drama, and for the first time in months I felt something settle fully inside my chest. Not tension, not defense, just ownership. That word had once felt heavy. Now it felt grounding. The house didn't feel like something I had to guard anymore. It felt like something that understood its purpose. Guests came and went gently. A woman left behind a handwritten poem folded neatly under the bedside lamp. A man stitched a small coaster with his initials and placed it on the kitchen table with a shy smile before leaving. Another guest left a single white flower on the pillow, still damp with morning dew. None of them asked about my family. None of them questioned the extra lock on the door. They didn't need to. The atmosphere explained itself. Respect entered with them, it left with them, and in between there was calm. I noticed something else too. I stopped checking my phone every hour. I stopped wondering if another post would appear. Silence had become normal again, but this time it wasn't avoidance, it was acceptance. My son didn't call, he didn't write. At first I expected something, an explanation, an attempt, a bridge, but days turned into weeks, and slowly I realized something surprising. I wasn't waiting. Have you ever noticed when you stop waiting for someone to understand you, that's when you truly become free? I walked along the edge of the lake more often, slowly because my knees don't allow rushing anymore. I made soup in the afternoons and let it simmer while soft music played in the background. I read for hours again. Not to distract myself, but because I wanted to. The house creaked gently at night, familiar and steady. The guest room stayed ready but never claimed. There was no sense of being used, only shared presence. I thought back often to that dinner table, to her smile, to his nod, to my sentence, "This is my home, not yours." It had felt bold in that moment, but now I understood something deeper. That sentence wasn't just about walls. It was about identity. For years I had defined myself by what I provided: support, money, space, flexibility. And when someone tried to turn that generosity into obligation, I finally saw the pattern. Giving is beautiful. But giving without limits slowly erases the giver. Sigh, I wish I had understood that earlier, but maybe we all learn when we're ready. One evening, as the sky turned a soft shade of pink and gray, I sat on the porch and watched a heron glide down near the reeds. It stood perfectly still, balanced and patient. I smiled. Nature doesn't overextend itself, it exists within its rhythm. I wanted that rhythm, I had it now. A few neighbors began greeting me differently too, not with pity. Not with curiosity, but with quiet respect. Word travels in small towns, not loudly but steadily. No one mentioned her posts again, no one asked intrusive questions, and I never spoke her name, not out of anger, out of clarity. She had taken enough space already. I didn't owe her more air. Sometimes the strongest closure isn't confrontation, it's absence, and just when I thought the story had fully settled, I found myself thinking about that one sentence again. The one that made the room fall silent, the one that changed everything, because there was something I hadn't told you yet about that night, something about the look on my son's face after I said it. And understanding that look, well, That's what finally allowed me to let go completely. Have you ever replayed a single moment in your mind so many times that you finally see what you missed the first time? I've replayed that dinner night often. The candles, the pie. Her sweet voice assigning rooms in my house like she was arranging furniture in a catalog, my son nodding, and then me standing up, smiling and saying, "This is my home." Not yours. When I first told you that part, it sounded simple, strong, final, and it was, but what stayed with me wasn't her reaction, it wasn't even the silence in the room, it was my son's face. When I said that sentence, something flickered in his eyes, not anger, not embarrassment, something closer to surprise, as if he had suddenly realized I was not just mom. I was a person, a woman, an owner, an individual with a line. Have you ever watched someone realize you are no longer the version of you they depended on? It's a strange shift, quiet, subtle, powerful. I think in that moment, he saw that I would not automatically adjust anymore. And maybe that scared him, maybe it confused him, maybe it forced him to grow in ways he wasn't ready for, I don't know. What I do know is this: after that night, everything changed, not loudly but structurally. The moving truck came, the police came, the posts came, the silence came, but underneath all of it something else was forming. Self-respect. Ha ha ha, it sounds dramatic when I say it like that, but truly that's what it was. I had spent decades being reliable, flexible, available. I wore those qualities like badges of honor, and they are good qualities, they matter, but somewhere along the way I forgot to wear boundaries with the same pride. When my son didn't speak at that table, it hurt deeply, but it also revealed something important. I could not teach him courage by remaining silent myself, so I didn't. I stood, I smiled, I said the truth, and then I lived it. I didn't scream, I didn't insult, I didn't humiliate, I simply acted in alignment with my words. That's the part that matters most, because anyone can say no in anger. It takes something steadier to say no calmly and mean it. The house feels different now, not guarded, not tense, just aligned. The sign beside the door, private, by invitation only, isn't there to keep people out, it's there to remind me that access is a privilege, not an assumption. Guests continue to come gently. They bring books, flowers, small handwritten notes they leave quietly. Peace enters, peace leaves, and I remain steady in the middle of it. My son hasn't returned, he hasn't argued again. He hasn't apologized either, and you know what, I'm okay with that. Some lessons don't require speeches, they require time. I mailed him a birthday card, I signed my name, that was enough. I'm not closing the door to him. I'm simply refusing to remove the boundary. There's a difference. Have you ever realized that standing up once can reshape your entire future? I used to think strength meant sacrifice. Now I know strength sometimes means stillness. It means saying, "This is mine," without anger. It means allowing others to feel uncomfortable if they must. It means choosing peace over approval. I wish someone had told me that earlier in life. But maybe we all arrive at these understandings when we're meant to. If you're listening right now and you've ever felt pressured to give more than you can afford, emotionally, physically, financially, let me tell you something gently. Protecting your space does not make you selfish. It makes you wise. And if this story felt familiar, if you've ever sat at your own table and realized you needed to stand up, you're not alone here. This channel shares stories like this: quiet strength, difficult choices, peaceful endings. If that speaks to you, subscribe and stay with us. There's comfort in knowing others have walked this path too. And before I end, let me leave you with the truth that changed everything for me. I didn't lose my family that night, I found myself. Sigh, and that has made all the difference.